Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm your host, Jerry. I'm here with Daren May, MVP of Colorado.
No, just Windows development.
Just Windows development in Colorado.
And there's more than one of us.
Now, funny enough, Windows development, but aren't you a web developer?
I am. I am a polyglot.
You're a polyglot, among other things. And what is the difficulty of web development today?
Well, you're trying to find one thing?
It's something .js.
You don't like JavaScript.
Well, I haven't come to love it yet.
The reality is, web development, there are so many frameworks, there are so many tools that you can use and so on. It is often very hard to choose the right thing or to choose anything. And there are many different systems that you want to integrate with, such as Microsoft Graph or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you go about integrating with something like Microsoft Graph when you've chosen React as your front end or you've chosen Angular as your front end?
Yeah.
How do you bring something in without having a native Angular library?
How do you do it?
I don't know.
Well, wouldn't it be nice if we had somebody on the show to tell us all about it? And we do. That's this episode of Dev Radio. Hi, and welcome. This is Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm Jerry. This is Daren and Nikola. Thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here.
Nikola, I know that you're on the PAX team, PAX, right here inside Microsoft. What's PAX stand for?
Yeah, we love our acronym. So it stands for Partners, Analytics, and Essential Experiences, which basically means we work with our partner ecosystem, our developer ecosystem. We work on analytics, making sure developers are successful. And then we also work our first-party apps, such as the calculator or maps that you find in Windows.
Oh, you do a lot of stuff.
We do a lot of stuff, yes.
It's a pretty broad mandate.
I have to tell you the truth. I had PAX wrong. I thought it was something else. I thought it was Partner Application Experience. I don't know why I thought that.
It was. We changed our name about a year ago, actually, around this time. It was called Partner App Experiences, but with reorgs happen all the time. We grew a lot, so we kind of got more stuff going on.
It's always the funniest thing. That's was the second episode where we've had the same acronym has had a complete rebrand behind the scenes and it means something different.
Nobody had to change their business card.
No.
That's so nice.
Exactly it.
That's so nice. So you're a software engineer and you're working on a top secret project that you can't tell anybody about. What is that project?
So it's an open source library. It's called the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. It's a collection of web components that already know how to talk to the Microsoft Graph. So for a web developer to leverage the Microsoft Graph, it's only 1 or 2 lines of code now.
So hold on a second. So I've just built my application in React, and you're telling me I can just pull down this library and it's just going to work inside React? How does that work?
Right. Because we're all depending on web standards. All the components that we're building are agnostic of a web framework. So even if you're using React, Angular, Vue, even jQuery, or no framework at all, the web components just work because they're natively supported by the browser. So you don't have to pull in any additional dependencies for it.
Now, wait just a second. He didn't tell you which version of Angular he's using, which version of React he's using.
It doesn't matter what version. No, it doesn't matter at all. It's because it's a web standard. You're just using it just like you use a div or just like you use an image inside of HTML. That's the same way you would use these web components.
Just like you would use a div.
So, you and I, we're both XAML guys. Yeah. So this is like a custom control or a user control?
Right,
Wait,
exactly.
No. Nikola, you're a XAML guy. Tell me the truth.
I came from the XAML world. I used to do the Windows Community Toolkit for years. And I came from .NET. This is a change for me as well. So.
Yeah, look at that. All right, so talk to us about how this relates. Because there is something about XAML that feels like a web component.
Right, yeah. When I started working on the web about 4 or 6 months ago, time flies, I went to web components because it just felt so natural to me as a XAML developer, because it's very similar. When you're used to making custom controls for XAML, you get the custom namespace my control, and you can add your own properties and events. This is the same way you do it on JavaScript now in HTML. You create these custom elements, you give it your own name, and then you give it your own properties, your own events. It just works like a native component inside of a browser.
So from an HTML perspective, it's a new element that you're putting in your angle brackets. Your properties are exposed up as attributes on those elements, and you just drop it in. And then you regular JavaScript using the DOM to interact with those things, and away you go.
Exactly. It's the same way as you already been working with HTML. You just have an additional elements now to work with.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room here, right? Why are you writing these controls? Isn't the graph remarkably easy to use?
It is. I agree. It's super easy. It's just a REST endpoint that gives you access to thousands of different APIs, which is awesome. What we wanted to do is make it easier for developers to don't have to write any common UI. So if a developer wants to just put in a calendar control inside of the UI, they don't have to go figure out how to write the control or how to talk to the graph. They can really quickly get started immediately. So if they have this fantastic idea to build an experience, they don't have to now figure out how to build a UI for a common thing that a lot of developers use. They can just use this toolkit immediately.
The toolkit then provides, I guess, the top handful of use cases that you've seen developers using. What are some of those use cases that you've started to address?
So the first one that we started with is a logging component. A lot of developers, the feedback we got is it's not the easiest thing to get started with authentication. Before you can even get to the Microsoft Graph, you have to authenticate with Azure Active Directory to be able to either use a Microsoft account or an enterprise account. So the feedback we got is developers don't find it intuitive to log in. So Microsoft Authentication Library is fixing a lot of those issues now. It was announced at Build. We took that a step further where we just gave you one component called login component. All you do is just put this on your page and gives you a sign in button that you can just click and automatically log into whatever client ID you've provided us. It logs you into the Active Directory. So it's one line of code to authenticate using the MCell library.
Well, that makes me feel good because I also found that to be onerous to
managing your OAuth flow with your use once tokens and everything along those lines.
And all the blogs are like, all you have to do is like,
right.
Oh, good. So, all right, step number one, get over the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle was just authenticating to use the graph. Beautiful. All right, so now there's barely any UI, just the login button, I assume.
Just the login button. Once you log in, the login button turns into your personal information. So your image or your name. You can press it again, you can log out. So it's a really easy way to manage logged in, logged out state. We also have simple components such as a person component. So if you want to use multiple people and you want to show their image and they want to show their name or email, we have a person control. You just drop it in, you give it what user you want to display. Like I want to display Jerry, just provide person query Jerry. It will go fetch the name of Jerry, find the person with Jerry, find their image, and just display it for you. So with one line of code, you found a person, you displayed it on your application. You can use this anywhere you want to use this in. We also have an agenda control. So if you have a list of events, you can just plop them on your page and just displays all your events. And then that's it. It's one line of code to do that. We have a control that you can
I assume the agenda control has several different views depending on what kind of a calendar you want to show.
So we started with a single agenda view. We're actually working on creating a day view, a week view, and a month view. So the control will kind of evolve to be a more functional control. But initially, we started with just the agenda, which just displays all your calendar events right now.
Got it.
And then the most complex control that we built is the task control. And now the task control works with the Microsoft To Do. So Microsoft To Do is a new API in the Microsoft Graph. Not a lot of people know this. It's part of the beta endpoint. So you can work with all your Microsoft To Do tasks. And you also can work with your Microsoft Planner tasks. So you have the ability to actually work with both of them at the same time. And you can add tasks.
Hang on. Most people don't know the difference between Microsoft Planner and Microsoft To Do. Microsoft Planner, in fact, is probably hidden to most people. They don't know that this was even a product that we snuck out. Tell us what Microsoft Planner is, just in a little.
So it's a great project management tool. It just gives you a bucket and tasks. You can manage all your projects. And you can share across many people within your organization. It's a great tool for project planning and managing. It provides you these to-do tasks.
You might compare it to Trello, to be honest. It's very simple.
Absolutely. I use GitHub boards. It's very similar to me in GitHub boards, for example, the way you manage your projects.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. So I can use To Do. I can use Planner. Keep going.
Right. And so that's all the controls we have right now. And then we're building other controls. So the biggest feedback we got, because these controls, we built them outside of the community. We built them all in secret before we actually released it. And now that we got feedback from the community of what they want us to build, The biggest one we got was a people picker. A lot of developers want a people picker. I can just pop it up on my page, start typing, and just shows all the people. I can select multiple people, a single person, etc. So you can use that. And we also got feedback that people want a person card. So that way, for example, if I hover over a person, it shows up their information, maybe their org chart, maybe what files they're working on, etc. It's a lot more information. So something that I can just plop in on my page, it just does it all in one line of code. So we're trying to figure out what are these one-liners that people use constantly. They can just drop on their page and don't have to worry about it.
So how can people interact with you guys on the team to let you know what their priority asks are and that sort of things?
Oh yeah, they're clearly telling you something. How are they telling you all this?
Right. So we are all on GitHub. We are all open source. We do everything in the public. All our project management is done on GitHub projects, on GitHub boards. So if a developer wants to interact with us, just drop us an issue, or we can also get questions or feedback, or feature requests, anything. We interact with them directly all on GitHub.
You've been there for 5 months now working on this. That's pretty cool. How big's the team?
So right now it's my team. We're about 5 people working on and off on the projects. Myself and another person working full-time on this project. And then we're working with several MVPs who are also helping us out as well on giving us feedback and making sure that we're steering in the right direction.
MVPs are always getting involved.
Yep. Obsessive types.
Obsessive types. Now, but it's not just the 5 of you and a handful of MVPs who can contribute to the code base, right? Because this is fully open source.
Correct. It's open to anybody. So we have issues that anybody can jump on. We label them with the help wanted sign. So if anybody just feels like, hey, I want to help out and contribute, sort by help wanted and just pick out the issue you want to work on and just start working on it. And this is just
brush up your JavaScript.
Yeah. This is my chance to really make a difference.
It would make a difference.
Yeah, it's pretty cool actually, because I think if a lot of developers are already familiar with JavaScript in a pretty deep way, to be honest. And when you go through and you look at a well-tailored issues list, they aren't massive asks, right? These are things that we need to do this, but I just don't have time today, so we're going to keep it listed there. I can pull that down, and man, that's a resume bullet. I mean, that's a real thing that you were able to contribute back to a real product that's really used by real developers.
Yeah,
really.
So was there a particular class of application that you guys had in mind when you originally started to put this toolkit together? Were you sort of focusing on, say, internal line of business applications, or?
Right. So when we first started working on this, the other feedback we got from MVPs or from the community was that, hey, we want to be able to use this everywhere. We just don't want this to be targeted to a specific framework. A lot of frameworks that exist today, either they just work on SharePoint or they only work on a specific framework like a React. So the feedback we got is we want something that works everywhere. So from the beginning, we always thought that this is going to be targeted for any web developer, no matter if they're building just a web application or a progressive web app, or they're building a SharePoint web part, or they're working on a Teams tab, or they're working on an Office add-on. These components should work. So we're putting a lot of effort in making sure that these components work across all of these different frameworks and these different platforms, so that way they can be leveraged and shared across all these. So if you're building experience that's supposed to work on Teams and SharePoint and a web app, it should work on those. So we created, we even created what we call providers that are able to authenticate you on all these platforms. So we have a SharePoint provider that automatically gives you authentication context depending on who's logged in on SharePoint, or a Teams provider that allows you to log in on Teams tab, which it's one of the things that's not that easy to do. And we've kind of provided these providers that make it really easy for the developers to use these components on all of these platforms.
Just the authentication part that you're giving them might be the biggest win of all. I mean, such a big effort that you guys have been able to pull together. Let me ask you about if it's line of business applications, public applications, all of those are pretty cool. If I'm a developer looking at it, maybe you could walk us through what the experience is like getting the toolkit.
Sure, absolutely. So I just have Visual Studio Code open right now with a single index.html page. There's nothing in here really, just that index.html page. First thing I've done here is I've added the script for the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Now we ship the Graph Toolkit with either just a bundle that we provide, which contains all the code. You can also use it through NPM. So if you have an NPM project, you can just do npm install Microsoft/MGT, and we'll just download the toolkit and you can use it that way. The simplest way is to just run it this way. So if I need
to be inside my firewall or something like that, then I can I can have an option.
Right, you can have any kind of options. Whatever toolchain you use, we want to make sure that we support it, and that's why we provided the both options.
Cool.
The best way to get started is if you just go to our actual GitHub page. The short link is aka.ms/mgt.
Can you zoom into that a little bit,
Yes,
Nikola?
yes, absolutely. This is where you can actually, the README has all the information you might need to get started. And that's where I got the script tag from. I just copied the script tag from our README and just put it in on my HTML page there. But it has all the information about how to use it via NPM or how to access everything. So I've just plopped it in there, and I've added this MGT login component. That's the login component I mentioned before. And if I show you what this looks like right now, let me see. Let me put this side by side. I'm going to go localhost. Let's put this side by side. Right now, it's just a sign-in button that doesn't really do anything because it doesn't know how to log you into AAD. So the way we've solved this problem is added these providers. So we have this mcell provider that uses the mcell.js library to authenticate the user. And all you've done is just added the client ID. And I got this from the Azure portal. You can go to portal.azure.com, create a new Azure Active Directory application, and that will just give you a client ID. You just drop in here. And that's it. So with these 2 lines of code, now I can actually sign in to Azure Active Directory. So when I click sign in, now it works because it already has that context of how to authenticate. I'm going to use one of my tenant accounts. Next, sign in. And that's it. With all that code, we just signed in and we're able to start calling the Microsoft Graph now. We already populated the current logged in user. So at a minimum, you're looking at about 2 lines of code for the components and 1 line of code for just the script here. And you can notice here the components I mentioned before, we've called them MGT dash, so all of them start with MGT, and they act just like a regular HTML component. I haven't added any other framework in here to get this to work. This is just vanilla JavaScript here, which I think is a very important point to kind of point out.
Sure. Could you inspect the element in the web page, just show how simple that gets rendered out?
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and open, oops, F12 is not working. Here we go. Okay, there it is. Let me put it down on the side. So if you look at this component here, I'll zoom in. Let me just drop this down. Oops. If you look at the body, we can see here we have the MGT login component, which is this one, and the MGT mcell provider here. When you open this up, everything's hidden inside of a shadow root. So what the shadow root allows you to do, which is another web component standard, it's part of the web component spec, it actually hides all the content inside of that component. So even if you write CSS that might conflict with this component, it's hidden away inside of a shadow root. So you can still write.
So it's encapsulated.
It's exactly.
Cool.
It's encapsulated its own little DOM, which is kind of sub DOM of your main DOM, and allows you to you can still go now and inspect this. But from CSS perspective, you can't actually access that directly. You actually have to do something to actually template it the way you want to do it.
Okay, because that's really cool, because that was going to be my next question, was how well does this play with all the different layout frameworks such as Bootstrap and so on and so forth? And that just answered that succinctly.
Right, exactly, yeah. And that's, I mean, Web Components is a combination of 4 different web standards, and Shadow DOM is one of them. The custom element is the second one, which is the ability to provide your own names for components. We have the HTML templating, the ability to do templating, and if you're interested, I can show you how that works, but that's usually for authoring components. Etc. And then moving on to other components, and we've been working on a few things that I'll talk about in a bit in terms of templating and styling, which I think is interesting to talk about. But let me show you how the agenda component looks like. So if I just do MGT agenda, for example, and I just save, it automatically logs in your agenda. So this is just the agenda of the current logged in user. And we've provided some options here. So for example, I can do, let me see if I remember, group by day. I think we called it. It just groups it by day and just provides you this kind of UI you can kind of play around with yourself. But we also provided ability for you to template things. Web components, even though they're not a new standard, they've been around for about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years already. They haven't really seen a lot of adoption until recently. So there's not a lot of guidance on how to handle certain situations. So coming from the XAML world, we really like templates, like item template or data template, whatever it is. So we thought, how do we do something similar for our components as well? So we're using HTML templates to kind of do something ability to kind of template specific items. So for example, if I give it a template, sorry, not data source, data type equals event. So for example, I can give it a template for how I want each event to be rendered. And here I can just render a specific event.subject, I think, just by providing this template. And this will kind of take that template and kind of render each one of those events. If you want to provide your own style on it, you still don't have to worry about calling the Microsoft Graph. We'll handle that for you. We'll just pass in that event object to you to kind of render it however you want to render it. So pass in your own classes, do whatever you want here, and kind of have fun with it.
Well, I certainly see the relationship to XAML.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it kind of has its own benefits coming from the XAML world and coming to take these ideas over to this web world.
Yeah, without changing the paradigm, because that's often been the problem is you bring with you something from, say, the rich desktop environment, and it doesn't resonate with the web community. But this is leveraging the existing web standards and just bringing them to the fore.
And existing web standards are pretty. You don't really have a browser limitation anymore because it's an old enough standard that every browser supports it.
So most browsers support it right now. So Chrome supports it, Firefox supports it, Safari supports it, the new Edge supports it. The old Edge doesn't support it natively, but we ship polyfills that support it. And then IE doesn't support it natively, but our polyfills also make it support. So I can open this in IE, and this will work just fine because we've provided all the necessary polyfills. So let me go to localhost 3000, I believe. There it is. And then it works in IE as well because we provide all the required polyfills for it to work. So it truly works everywhere now.
That's awesome.
That is super cool. No doubt about it. Wow, that's what 5 guys do in 5 months, right there.
Exactly. They must have been working agile.
Yeah, you must have been total agile.
I mean, our work is not done yet. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that we're kind of trying to figure out. Just because we're in this new world of web components, we're still trying to figure out a lot of important things, such as we haven't figured out how to handle accessibility correctly, and that's something that's really important for us. So we're trying to get accessibility right, and that's one of the biggest focus that we have. Same thing with styling customization. I mean, I show you how to do templating. We want to make it even better for people to kind of try their own styles. So we're experimenting with ways to disable the shader root if somebody wants to, so they can provide their own styles on top of the UI that we give them, or have the ability to provide CSS custom properties to kind of style just specific parts of the components. If you just want to change color or anything, ability to do that. We're also playing we're experimenting with teaming. So because a lot of these components can work across different platforms. So if I want to use it in Teams and if I want to use it in SharePoint, both of those platforms have their own team paradigms. They have different colors, and they might expect that your components to look like they're part of Teams or part of SharePoint. So we're experimenting with providing teams out of the box that we can do something like team equals Teams. And this will use a specific team that is for Teams, etc. So we're still kind of experimenting and playing around with this.
So we're going to see a resource dictionary element. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but maybe.
Nailed it.
That's it.
Yeah.
So what about the future? What's your sort of short to medium term roadmap starting to look like?
Right. So we're in preview right now. We're still kind of experimenting and changing things really rapidly. But we're expecting to go to have a 1.0 release in the next, I want to say 2 to 3 months, but things are changing so quickly. We are working on the 2 new components I mentioned, which is the people picker and the person card. And we're experimenting with all these different things we can do with web components. We're improving our testing frameworks. We want to make sure that we can test really easily on all the different browsers with different frameworks. We want to test with different platforms. There's so many things to test because it's the web world. It runs everywhere. So we're spending a lot of time on that. And then trying to figure out how do we make it easier for developers to use these components without them having to kind of go through a lot of hoops. Our big focus from the beginning has been make it easy for developers to get started, but give them the ability to customize as much as needed. And that's why we created templates, and that's why we're spending so much time on styling, is we want developers to kind of take these components and make them work the way they want them to work, not the way we expect them to work. And that's kind of different than what other web frameworks do these days, where they kind of expect you to do things their way.
Yeah. And a lot of opinionated frameworks out there for sure.
Right. Yeah.
You had talked a little bit about accessibility. I suppose there's localization in this as well?
Not right now, and that's another thing where we're kind of looking at and figuring out how do we do localization. Is it something that the developer will have to provide there on their own, or is it something that we ship out of the box? You know, being an open source project, we could leverage the community to kind of help us with localization, but that also comes with its own challenges in the ways of how do you verify the localization is correct, et cetera. So these are some of the things that we're still kind of trying to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, just to have a little bit of a segue here, this is one of the great things about Microsoft embracing open source and so on, because previously you wouldn't have been able to show this to anybody before you've actually addressed accessibility and before you'd addressed localization, because Microsoft had to ship everything with all that stuff out of the box before it went.
Yeah.
Right.
Doing this open now means that people can take advantage of this if it makes sense for them, or wait or contribute if they need localization.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right, exactly. We're just trying to make sure we work with the community from the beginning and try to get things right instead of make a mistake and having to scrap it and kind of do it a different way later on.
Nikola, walk me through just a second. So now I know I can add this to, regardless of the technology I've chosen on the web, I can use these components. Regardless of the browser that I'm using, I can have some confidence in using these components. And we know there's a future to these components, and you've kind of lined them out. Talk to me just a little bit about why I care about the graph.
Right. Well, Microsoft Graph is the gateway to all the data that we have that a user has in the Microsoft Cloud, right? So if they're using any of the Office 365 products, such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or they have a Microsoft account, or they want to leverage a lot of the APIs that Windows has in the Microsoft Graph, they use these REST endpoints to do that. For example, on Windows, if you want to save the activities for a current running application or be able to see what activities the user is doing, you use the Microsoft Graph. On Office, if you want to get the user's files, or they want to get their calendar information, their emails, all the data they have in the Microsoft Graph, use the Microsoft Graph. Same thing with the Microsoft Mobility and Security Suite. If you want to work with Intune, we're also adding a lot more other applications that Microsoft building, or all their APIs are built completely in the graph. Microsoft Teams is completely on the graph. So everything that Microsoft is doing and has an API for is always going to be in the Microsoft Graph. And it's basically the best way to kind of build applications these days and get that intelligence and the data from Microsoft.
I don't know if a lot of developers realize that Microsoft Graph is that single endpoint for all things. Like, it's not like Teams is going to build a web UI or a web API. It's not like you're going to see all of these disparate APIs. They're intentionally pushing them all to the graph, partly, I think, for security's purpose, so that you can authenticate to a single place that's completely trusted by the graph. Then you can access everything that I have, or I could even give permission to Daren to be able to see my things as well. It's just, I can handle it all in a single place. I think when they hear graph, I don't know what they think. I don't know, their architecture.
It depends where they're coming from. I mean, Facebook has had a graph for quite some time, and those sorts of things. So if you're working in that space where you're used to integrating with these large data collectors, if we want to use that word, then it kind of makes sense. But for a lot of people that are maybe building more traditional applications where they're expecting to find an API endpoint for this and an API endpoint for that, and to your point, having to manage tokens to access all of these different things, it becomes quite the headache, especially when you've got to start dealing with refresh tokens. Now at least there's just one endpoint where you have to worry about refresh and recycle and those things, and you can really build a
think of how wrong you could get it if you had to have 5 different tokens.
I don't have to think. I can just have to remember.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely right. So now, if you look at your future, like, how many controls do you need to build? Well, with the Graph API, that's only access to everything. So you're going to have to build basically everything when you're finally done. You're never going to be done. Man, you are never going to be done.
Job for life.
You got to rebuild Excel. You got to rebuild Office. You got to all these things that you need to totally provide. Although, in the end, you're really based on the demand of users really demand of developers who are getting the demand from users and giving you feedback through your GitHub site.
Right. Yeah, we're looking for these common patterns that developers are having to write over and over and over again, and just giving them this library that just does it for them, so they don't have to do it. I mean, we're not going to rewrite Excel. I mean, not many developers actually need Excel in their applications. Or if they do, we should get that feedback through GitHub and let us know to be able to build it.
I'm going to be putting that in.
Yeah, and Nikola is going to assign it to you.
Yeah. Need help. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but it is big, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, why would you do? Is this just a science project? Absolutely not. This is like tapping into the future of the way we intend applications to be accessed by developers. That's the way.
New APIs get added to the Microsoft Graph constantly, and now we're looking into how do we, as we're adding these new APIs, do we need to build components for them, and how do we do that? And it's an ongoing process. It's like you keep adding more APIs, you keep adding more components, and you keep going and going and going. Yeah.
What's going to be the story for versioning components? As new features and so on are added and so on. Say I'm using the current profile control, and that evolves into something else. How are we going to manage that moving forward, or is that an answer that's up in the air right now?
That's a great question, and yes, we haven't actually figured that out. I wanted to put all of the components in one package and kind of version them together, kind of the same way we've been doing the Windows Community Toolkit. But the more I'm talking to web developers, is the more of them I get, the more feedback I'm getting that they want this version separately. So having separate package for components. So maybe I want to use 1.0 for the profile control and 2.0 for the line component, etc. So we might actually go that route. It's something that we haven't figured out exactly yet.
Cool. Now, Nikola, let's be friends for a second here. One of us are a XAML developer. One of us might not be. One of us might be interested in adding components like this to a XAML application. What do you say?
So we actually have the Windows Community Toolkit, which already has several graph components in there. It's one of the discussion. I'm still involved in the Windows Community Toolkit project myself. I'm kind of splitting my time between these two projects. We haven't really we haven't given a lot of love to those graph controls in about a year now. And we are discussing once we've kind of stabilized on the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, take the learnings from this toolkit and kind of move it over to the Windows Community Toolkit and kind of give those controls some love and kind of build them up to give XAML developers the controls they need for the graph as well. I mean, they can still use the Windows Community Toolkit ones, but we do want to make them much, much better and kind of make the authentication better and using the graph better.
Yeah, because if the ones in the Windows Toolkit are excellent, the ones in the Graph Toolkit are awesome. I mean,
exactly.
Right? I mean, that's kind of, you want to, yeah. That
they
kind
said
of
it much better than I would. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. The Windows Toolkit are not down level. Just the Web Toolkit is more up level.
Yeah, there you are. That's brilliant. And honestly, that's the reason both of these are open source. I mean, it's not like there's secret sauce that can't be ported from one place to another. That absolutely.
Yes.
And we got MAL coming, and there's a whole bunch of things happening as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good. All right, so any developer can help you. This whole thing is written in what? C#?
It's close. TypeScript.
It is TypeScript.
In TypeScript, yes.
It's very close. Yes.
So if you know JavaScript or TypeScript, then all of a sudden you're a qualified contributor to this open source project.
There you go. Yes. Or you have a C# developer. It's pretty easy to get to TypeScript.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
How's the documentation?
Documentation is actually pretty good. I mean, it can be much better. We are working to put it into docs.microsoft.com right now. We have an open PR that should be merged any day now for developers to kind of go through it. And we have documentation for each component, what properties they are, how to use it, and et cetera, what you would expect. If there's anything missing, we are looking for feedback and help from the community to improve those as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
Sounds good.
This is a cool thing, man. I'm glad you're doing it. I absolutely understand the pain point of doing the initial connection to the graph. I'm glad you're making it so, I don't want to say brainless, but painless, I guess is really what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Try to make it easy for developers to get started. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, how long until a developer can feel confident putting it in their application that they're going to put into production?
Right. So we're looking at about maybe 2-3 months before we actually hit 1.0, where we can get to a stable point and we can say we actually are out of preview. We still have a few things to figure out before that happens. So we might push that by a month or so. But I think if people are active on their GitHub and on my Twitter account, they can get all the details.
Know. Yeah, because it's not a secret project. This is in the open project.
Right.
It's intended for everybody. That's exactly right. That's what's special about it. That's what's unique. That's what's good. Let me ask you one last thing. If I use the authentication piece, from that point, I don't really need to use all of the extra controls that you're providing. If I have a custom thing that needs to be done, I can use that authentication piece to get through that harder piece, that wall, and from that point forward, have the token and all the access to the graph that I need to make all the queries I need for my custom solution.
Correct. Yeah, we optimize for two things there. First is if you just want to use authentication, you can just use that, and then we'll give you access to the SDK we use internally. So you can just start calling APIs direct from that SDK. You just say authenticate me, and then start calling the me endpoint or whatever endpoint from that. It's only a few lines of code to do that in your JavaScript. And then second, if you already have authentication in your app, you don't want to use our authentication, we provide providers that just allow you to kind of tell us what authentication is, and the components will automatically start using your authentication instead. So that way, either way, it works. We don't want you to kind of use our stuff if you don't want to. We just want you to use the stuff that you need, not everything.
So in the first scenario, you would handle all of the refresh tokens and any of those things as necessary. Right. In the second scenario, you've got to have some sort of promise or whatever that is handling that refresh yourself.
Correct. Exactly. You just implement our interface that we give you, and then we handle everything else.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's cool. That goes both ways. I can't even imagine a third scenario. What if you didn't want to authenticate?
Then don't.
Don't. Actually, yes, you can use our components. Just give us the data you want us to display, and we'll display it. You don't have to call the graph. So that's the third scenario.
Oh. Data binding.
Is that?
Yes.
I like that too.
There you go. Good answer.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Choose one of these two. Nope, we've got a third one.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Nikola, thanks. Now, if you're a developer watching this and you've been wanting to dabble with the Microsoft Graph, or maybe you have in the past and you thought it was a little bit difficult to get started with, well, things have changed. Thanks to Nikola and his team, they've built out the toolkit for the graph that you can go and get today. What's the URL? Remind me one more time.
aka.ms/MGT, Microsoft Graph Toolkit.
MGT, Microsoft Graph Toolkit. It's brilliant.
Perfect.
Man, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.